There are three things I regularly talk about. I talk about discovery as a process and not a stage. I talk about meeting customers and buyers where they are. And I talk about leveraging content and embedding content at every stage of the customer journey. If you've seen any of the conversations that I've had on this channel, you'll probably find one or more of those phrases in each episode. And I think everybody understands the meaning behind that, at least at a fundamental level. But the question becomes, how do you actually apply that into your world as an early stage startup founder who's trying to go from 0 to 1 to growth to traction? It's easier said than done, right? Or is it? In this conversation, what I'm going to share with you is a template that you can use for your market research purposes for executive level conversations that allow you to not only create content, but also learn a lot about the organizations that you're targeting, which will help you build your ICP, your messaging, and your validation on the fly. For those of you who are new to this channel, hi, I'm Dr. Jim. I've spent the better part of 15 plus years in 0 to 1 spaces. I've typically been in startup or accelerating growth organizations, either launching new markets or launching new products, particularly in the HR tech, TA tech, ed tech, IT staffing, and executive coaching spaces. So if you're an early stage founder who's trying to figure out product market fit and you're trying to go from 0 to 1 and you want to build something on the fly, and you're trying to get in front of as many customers as possible in a frictionless way and have a lot of meaningful conversations, you should consider checking out this episode and also subscribing to the channel. That's what I talk about every single day. So what does this template actually look like, and how should you structure it? Well, it's actually pretty easy. And if you've done some of the early work in terms of building your ICP theory, your ideal customer profile, and the avatar, a lot of this will seem turnkey. If you haven't, do that stuff first. You can find it on this episode and this episode in terms of how you actually construct that. So let's get a few context items out of the way. One of the things that I always talk about is how you need to think about discovery as a process, not a stage. All too often, if we're executing an outbound playbook, what we're typically doing is that we're thinking that we need to qualify a customer first and then bring them into a formal discovery process to figure out if there's a fit there. That's backwards, in my opinion. And for an early stage startup and for an organization that's before product market fit, that won't work. Because what you're going to be doing is that you're going to be excluding a lot of potentially viable customers without actually having the market data to validate whether those prospects should be in the consideration set or not in the consideration set. And that's what this allows you to do, is that it allows you to actually talk to every viable customer in your TAM and build your validation, messaging, and qualification criteria on the fly. And that's what we're going to do in this conversation. Is I'm going to break down the three elements of the template and talk through why each segment allows you to build your motion on the fly. So let's work through the market research template for executive level discovery and talk through the different segments. Now, the key thing to keep in mind is that when you're leveraging a market research outbound and content play, there's got to be multiple stages for you to navigate. The first layer is at the executive layer, the next layer is at the operational layer, and then the final layer is going to be at the user level. One of the things that I've mentioned before is that when you're thinking about discovery as a process versus discovery as a stage, you're going to need to talk to multiple people within the organization to determine what the organizational landscape is and how realistic it is for you to fit your product as a potential solution to the problems that they're having. And the first step in that process is to start at the executive level with a market research invite. Now, when you think about conducting market research, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out how do you actually get this to work, and how do you actually get this to work based on the stage that you're at, and how do you turn it into a living document? And that's what this allows you to do. The way you structure it is really simple. You have three sections of the template. The first section covers demographic items. The second section covers core research items. And the third section is a running list of springboards that allow you to go to the next stage in the process. So let's tackle the demographic segment of the template first. Now, on the demographic segment, this is what actually helps you build your ICP on the fly. When you look at the demographic segment, you have all sorts of different criteria that you can include in that as the front end of that market research effort when you're actually conducting the interview with your prospect. You're trying to establish patterns based on different criteria of the company, of the employee, of the team to determine what is your entry point and what does your actual ICP look like? What does the ideal persona look like? What does the organization look like? Now, all of those things are going to change over time. So the idea that I talk through when we're doing market research is that you want to do these in 10 interview sprints. So you interview 10 prospects that generally look the same, and then you validate it against the outcomes to determine, okay, how viable is this particular prospect or this particular segment as a criteria for you to dig deeper into that segment as you pursue your first handful of pilots. When you think about employee counts, when you think about the industry, when you think about the title of the person that you're trying to reach out to, all of those things factor in to determining the shape of your actual ICP. And this is how you build and test that on the fly. Oftentimes what happens is that you're building your ICP in a vacuum and you're building it in a boardroom based on what you think might be the case. This allows you to actually test and validate your theory using customer voice to determine how that goes. The second section of the market research template for executive level discovery are your core research questions. And one thing that I want to make sure that everybody is aware of is that you want to keep this limited to a handful of questions. I like 4 or 5 questions as the bulk of what we're doing at the executive level. Now, when you're thinking about what do I use to come up with those questions, that is going to be based on what your product does, and more specifically, the problem statements that you want to validate. We solve X, Y, and Z for a customer, which leads to A, B, and C in terms of impact. So think about all the different problems that you solve, list those things out, make a guess about what you feel is the most impactful problem statements that you want to validate, and then you use those as the basis for the core research questions that you're going to ask a potential prospect in the market research interview phase. Let's say you are an HR tech founder. You've built a new employee engagement platform, and you built it on the basis of our platform is better equipped to solve employee turnover in the first 90 days post-hire than any other competitor in the marketplace. You're going to have your 4 research questions around the post-hire onboarding phase of an employee and around turnover and around ramping within the first 90 days of an organization. The reason why you want to focus in that area is because you want to validate your product theory that your particular HR tech platform, in this hypothetical, is better equipped to solve employee engagement and onboarding and drive better retention outcomes in the first 90 days of an employee's life cycle. So if that's what you want to test and that's your problem statement, then you want to validate it through your research questions. Once you've actually asked those questions, the next step in the template is to identify the springboard questions that allow you to go to the next stage. So what the template allows you to do when you get into the core research questions is that it allows you to actively listen and ask follow-up questions based on things that you find interesting or things that need definition or things that might point to a trigger item that could be an avenue for you to explore further in a later conversation. So when you think about springboard statements or questions, these are all the things that you think are going to be triggers that you want to listen for that warrants a deeper conversation. So in some respects, this is a funneling exercise, but in other respects, it answers the question of how do I advance it from one stage to another? Well, this gives you a running library of things that you listen for, which helps you build the playbook for this stage of the discovery that allows you to move to the next step. Now, one of the things that you need to consider about this particular stage of that template is that to do discovery well, you need to account for a number of different stakeholders in the organization. So if you're starting at the executive tier, you need to have springboards that are designed to get you to the operational layer. And once you've built out that interview template, you need to have a set of springboards that allow you to get to the user level, and then you create another template there. Once you have that 3-tiered template interview format situated, now you have a great line of sight into the organization and you can understand the landscape. When you're building out your Springboard statements or questions, think about what the next step in the process should look like and what that conversation is supposed to feed. One of the things that you should really consider when you're going through this process is that all of these conversations should yield something that's of value to the executive person that's going to be facilitating that intro for you. So you should be thinking about how can you consolidate all of these conversations into a findings report that you hand off to the executive sponsor or the executive leader that you first met with. And that gives you another opportunity to validate the findings from there and create another conversation around better understanding the organization and what they're dealing with. So when you think about the market research template for the executive level discovery stage, you're going to create a different one for the operational layer, and you're going to create a different one for the user layer. They should all have these 3 segments. And this template should be in service of a broader report that you're going to compile and hand off to that executive leader so that you can actually discuss the findings and validate what your observations and findings are through those conversations. And that's it. That is how you build your market research template for executive level discovery. Now, the framework for how you build the operational layer and the user layer is going to remain similar, but you want to think about what's important to people at each of those layers so you can formulate the right questions. So what you're doing in this process is that you're marrying the product theory that you have and the messaging that you have and allowing the customer to actually shape it based off of what you're seeing from them in their actual workplaces. And in the process of doing that, you're also examining the problems that they have within their environment. And also you're likely to have them prioritize it to determine, hey, is this particular organization, is this particular person someone that's viable to get deeper into a conversation about what might be an opportunity for you and the organization to partner together. This is actually how you remove the friction from the buying process for the buyer. And this is how you actually meet buyers where they are. At no step in this process are you dragging people through a funnel. You're having a collaborative conversation and you're actually doing a lot of solid research that can actually have value to that prospect and the broader landscape. So one of the things that you want to think about when you're embedding content as part of your outreach, it doesn't necessarily need to be video content. It can have these research elements into it, which will serve a broader purpose to help position you as experts in the field. As an early stage founder, one of the things that I always talk about is that you want to build a content flywheel. Every conversation that you have with a prospect should inform some other piece of content that's helping you push your voice and your point of view out into the marketplace. So this is another way for you to do that. You're doing a lot of valuable market research. Each of those conversations will have key findings that you want to share out to the broader network that you're trying to reach. And that helps you position and measure what's actually tracking with your audience. When you think about implementing this, it's pretty straightforward. It's built on the foundation of you getting into the mindset of your potential buyer and validating that stuff through customer conversations, which will help you actually build out your motion on the fly. So hopefully this was useful. If you have questions on how to set up this document, if you need help building it from the ground up, or you just have questions about how to actually do this in your environment, drop me a comment or shoot me a DM. You can always find me on LinkedIn as well. And more than happy to have an initial conversation to help you map this out. So thanks for hanging out. If you like this conversation, appreciate you hanging out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment on what stood out for you or what you're still a little fuzzy on. I'll respond to those as well. Tune in next week. I'll have another episode that talks about how early stage founders can go from 0 to 1 to growth to traction. And if you like this conversation, check out this playlist and this episode, and I'll see you next time.